Hello.
Hey. Oh.
So we are ready to get started. We are in 2 Samuel of chapter 10. We ended with 9 and Mephibosheth, everybody's favorite name, which was Jonathan's crippled son, who David took in and wanted to provide for and gave him all the lands of Saul and wanted him to eat at his table to show kindness to Jonathan. Right?
Yes.
So we ended there, and then that brings us to chapter 10. Okay, now it happened afterwards that the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun, his son, became king in his place. Then David said, I will show kindness to Hanun, the son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. So David sent some of his servants to console him concerning his father. But when David's servants came to the land of the Ammonites, guess what happened? The princes of the Ammonites went to Hanun and said, oh, isn't David really coming here just to spy out the land so that he can overthrow you? And of course that wasn't David's intention at all. He was friends with his father. They disgraced these men and showed an act of defiance, and they shaved half these men's beard. And they cut off their clothes at the buttocks. Now, why did they do that? I think you can figure it out. Okay? The point is to incredibly shame them. All right? And of course, humiliate them and shame them and to show that they don't care. Like pretty much saying to David, we don't care, and just like scoff him. Right? Well, they knew at that point that they would infuriate him, so that now they all just came out to war. So David meets them in battle and of course wins, because we have already told you, already spoiled that part. David always wins. Right? Always wins. And okay. So what's interesting though is that he has a decisive victory over them. And it was Joab and Abishai, brothers. And they came at them in two different areas. And the truth is they were surrounded. What this story tells us is that they were completely surrounded, which means they should have lost. But Abishai has one side of half of the army, and Joab and the other, and they're fighting back to back to fight each side. And of course, even in the midst of that, the Lord gives them tremendous victory. And they defeat them handedly. Okay? And that was a conglomerate army of the Arameans and Ammonites. So, and of course it ends with David taking the spoil, and of course he continued to push back all Israel's enemies and take all of the land that was taken from them back on all different sides. So some time has passed. Okay, and David has been incredibly successful and blessed the people, and the favor of God is on him. And then that brings us to chapter 11. Okay, a very sad chapter. Now, you may think because, this is probably only like 4 or 5 years after. No, this is more like 20. Okay? Or at least 10 plus, where he's been king over Israel. All right? And things were going exceptionally well. And in the spring, all of them, they go out to war, right? That's when, because there's the winter, it's hard to travel, and they have to go out and face these enemies and raiders that are coming and plundering them. And in the spring, all the soldiers go out. David usually always goes with them, but this time he stayed behind. And he stayed behind, and if you're wondering, why was Bathsheba bathing on the roof? Well, you have to remember, she thinks all the men are gone. And mostly all the men are gone. All right? Except for one. All right? And David was looking out, and of course, when he saw her, his eyes were filled with lust, and he wanted her. And there's no other way to say it. That's what happened. Right? And he's a king, and he's gotten used to getting what he wants. All right? And you say, well, if I was a rich, powerful king, I wouldn't do that. You know what? The chances are you might. So, be humble. Because Well, anyway, he sees her, and of course, this is no new story. This has been, this is how man is. And he has her brought to him, and he sleeps with her. And then, she goes on her way, and he wakes up the next morning probably hoping he can just sweep it under the rug like it never happened. He knows it was wrong, but he gave into it, but hopefully it could just go away. And well, obviously God wasn't going to let it just go away, right? So what happens is Bathsheba becomes pregnant. And at this point, David doesn't know what to do. Now, what would a normal king do? Kill her husband, bring her in, and not care at all. Because he's the king, do whatever he wants. But David realizes that he has to submit to God, and he knows he's being watched, and he cares about his men, so he tries a more sneaky way to deal with this, so that he doesn't get caught. Whereas he has to get Uriah home so he can sleep with his wife, so they can think the child is his, and no one would know. All right. So David was actually trying to rescue Uriah, because most kings, if that was their child, they wouldn't care. They wouldn't care at all. Kings take what they want, right? So anyway, he sends for Uriah to come back from it. And Uriah is one of his 30 mighty men. Okay, and he brings him back, and he asks him how the war is going, treats him to this great banquet. Okay, and he tries to bless him. And he says, why don't you go home now and have a night to relax and be with your wife. So he goes and he sleeps on his doorstep. And David's attendants watching says, Uriah didn't go in. He slept on the doorstep. And of course, David then goes and meets with him and calls him back and says, well, why didn't you go home? And of course, he said something so noble, right? David didn't expect anybody to be that noble, right? You're acting like David acts. Right? And the guy's like, well, all the men are encamped, they're sleeping out on the ground, and the ark of God is with them, and they're all in battle, and I'm going to go here and just relax and be home and be with my wife when none of them can. He said he felt like it would be dishonoring to the rest of the men. So he wasn't going to do it. Well, of course, David was like, oh no, what do I do now? He came up with another plan. He's going to throw a big banquet, and he's going to try to get as many drinks as he can into Uriah, because if he gets enough into him, that whole honor is going to go right out the window, and he'll go home to his wife. That's his plan. It's a pretty good plan. It would work most of the time. Right? But he tries this big banquet. I'm sure he has attendants constantly feeding him drinks. Before he knows it, Uriah's had a bunch, he's had a fun, celebrate night, but he's ready to go back to war the next morning. Right? And but he doesn't want to go home still, because he's not going to do that, because he feels like he would be dishonoring Joab and the soldier and the rest of the men who cannot be at home and can't be with their wives. Right? So he doesn't go home. And at this point he realizes there's no way I'm going to be able to accomplish this. And it's going to come out. So then he does something. He adds wickedness to the wickedness he's already done. At this point, what should he have done? Of course, he should have came clean. It would have been horrible, but he should have. Right? But instead, he thinks he can cover it up. Now, Uriah is a soldier. He's at war all the time. It really wouldn't be that big a deal for him to die in battle, since he's in battle every day. Right? So he thinks of how he can get him to die in battle by telling Joab to go up close to the wall, which of course they would never do because they're too smart. But at this instance, do it and drop back a little bit from him. And of course, what's going to happen if you do that is he's going to get picked off from the wall. All right? So David comes up with a way that he doesn't have to kill him or anything, but let the enemies kill him. But yet he's able to disguise this whole thing. So anyway, he sends to Joab, and they do it. Joab plays along and follows orders, and Uriah dies. And of course, he sends an attendant to David to talk about the wall, and say, well, he's going to ask you, because of course David is a soldier, and he's going to say, why is my army so stupid to get too close to the wall? And then he told Joab to tell the guy, but Uriah is dead. So David would know why, and David doesn't even mention it, and says, And he sends the thing to Joab saying, don't let this trouble you. Just continue what you're doing. And now at this point, David, of course he feels bad, but he did it. At this point, it's over. But he didn't want it to come out publicly. It's a lot of shame, right? And he has a reputation with all of the people as being an incredibly godly man. And he seriously messed up and committed a sin, right? So he was trying to cover it. Well, he may have successfully covered it in the natural, but God was watching. And some time passes, and the Lord sends Nathan, and he comes in before him, and he tells him this story, and he sets the king up, and he tells him this story about this land. There's a rich guy, has all this stuff, but there's one poor man, and all he had was just one beautiful lamb, and he would take care of it, and he would cherish it. And yet the king just came and wanted more, and just took the lamb from this poor farmer, took all he had, when he had tons and tons. And so that, of course, was setting David up for David to freak out and say, who would do this? That's evil. You should pay for that. That's, of course. And then Nathan turned on and said, you are the man. And, of course, David's heart at that point just sank. Now, every other king, even all the kings of Israel and Judah, we see later on, a prophet confronts them. They used to say, cut his head off, throw him in prison. I don't have to listen to you. I'm the king. Right. Except David doesn't do that. He falls on his face and repents. Right. He doesn't have to listen or care. He's the king. You have to remember that. Right? Well, of course he does. And he falls and repents, and he knows. God knows. And let's go to exactly what Nathan says, because it's very important. Okay, the story, it's in chapter 12, and he tells the story about that. And then he says, you are the man. Verse 7. 12 verse 7. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, it is I who anointed you king over Israel, and it is I who delivered you from the hand of Saul. And I also gave your master's house and your master's wives into your care, and I gave you to the house of Israel and Judah. And if that had been too little, I would have added to you many more things like these. Why have you despised the word of the Lord by doing evil in his sight? You have struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the sons of Ammon. So, what does that mean? First of all, it means that the Lord sees conspiracies as murder. Because David, no Israelite man killed him. He was killed by the Ammonites, but the Lord's still holding him accountable for it. Right? So that didn't work. And the Lord saw it all. Verse 10, now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house. And of course it never does. David never sees peace. Because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord. Now, David did take, after Uriah was dead, he called for Bathsheba and he married her. Now, of course, technically after what he had already done, it was the right move because he has to raise this child now and she's now a widow. Right? But still, he took her because he wanted her originally. Right? So, verse 11, thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you from your own household. I will even take your wives before your eyes and give them to your companion. And he shall lie with your wives in broad daylight. Remember when I told you that the Bible was a rated R book? Yeah. Well, it is. Okay? Because, of course, you've read through the story and you see that this happens. Okay? Indeed, you did it in secret. But I will do this thing before all Israel and under the sun. Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said to David, the Lord has also taken away your sin. You shall not die, meaning his blood guiltiness will be removed. However, because by this deed you have given occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme the child also that is born to you shall surely die. So the child First of all, he's told, he's given 3 things that's going to happen.
Yeah.
First of all, he's never going to have peace. He's going to have war the rest of his days, which he absolutely does. Second of all, he knows that someone close to him is going to ravish his wives. That's horrible. I know don't even like saying it, but that's what he was told. And thirdly, that his child is going to die. The child right now is going to die. So that's the end of this. And of course, David humbles himself and repents. Different than any other king. The rest of them never do. Okay? But the next part is crazy. David was told this by the prophet, and he certainly and absolutely knows it's going to happen. But you know what he does? He puts on sackcloth, gets down on his face, and prays. And prays and prays and prays and prays and seeks God and prays. Why is he doing that? He's told the child's going to die. Well, he's by the child and he's continually praying and praying and praying anyway, even though he was told the child's going to die. And he's doing so much, he's not eating or anything, he's fasting and he's praying. And all of his attendants are going, what is going on with the king? He's totally losing it. I mean, he's just praying, he won't eat, he won't do anything, he's just on his face. And they don't know what to do with him. And then eventually the child dies. And the attendants are scared to say anything to him because he was so distraught over this that if they're scared if they say he's dead, they don't know what he's going to do. And their job is to protect him. So they say, he hears them whispering and he figures it out. And he says, is the child dead? And they say yes. And they expect him to lose it. But he does something very shocking. He gets up, calms down, goes and eats, gets dressed, and goes to the temple to worship. Very odd reaction. But what he says to the attendants, and they say, Master, when the child was sick and dying, you were on your face crying and travailing and praying and interceding, and now that he's dead, you're getting back to normal, and you're going to go worship, and they're totally confused by this. But his answer is the key to incredible spiritual understanding that David had. And the fact that he knew God. Because he says something shocking. He says, while the child was still alive, I prayed because the Lord is merciful. Perhaps he would have shown mercy. But now that the child is dead, the Lord has taken him. So what can I do now? The Lord made his choice. But what is so incredible is the fact that David took the word of the prophet, knew it was going to happen, but then believed that he could actually affect God in a way that God would relent because he's merciful and loving. It's an incredible statement by David, and of course it's awesome because he's a man after God's own heart. And of course, what does he do after the child does? Does he get angry and yell at God?
No.
He goes and worships. He accepted the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Right?
That's the true heart of repentance, and that was what PJ was talking to us about when he started.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just like he really, really humbled himself.
Yes, he did.
He really meant it when he asked God to
Absolutely.
forgive him.
And he was chosen because of that heart. It did not mean he was chosen because he was perfect and was not going to sin.
Right.
Because remember, all of us are capable of wicked things. Not a single one of us is above it. That was a good move, Jim. None of us are above it. And the minute we think we would have never done that, that's when you're being arrogant. Because you don't know what you would have done if you were the king who had many, many wives and you saw a beautiful girl and you're used to getting in your way. A moment of weakness could very easily happen. None of us ever have moments of weakness at all, right? So the point is that he was chosen because of his hard attitude, not because he's not capable of sinning, because we all are. But the way he repented, the way he humbled himself before God, that's why he was chosen. All right? And the fact that he was already told, but he said, you know what, I'm going to pray anyway because I know the Lord is merciful. And he might just change his mind and show mercy. We're going to see that later on at the end of Samuel when we get to the census and the Lord bringing the plague, but yet he sees Jerusalem and he just stops. He tells the angel to stop because he can't go do it anymore. Because he can't face it. He doesn't want to see Jerusalem destroyed. So, that is the end of this story for now. And David goes down and worships, and the Lord forgave him. But he knows one of the three bad things has already happened. There's two other coming.
Right.
One, he will always have war. He always has war. Second, one of his, it says companion, someone close to him is going to rebel against him. He knows that's coming too. All right? So, now what's interesting is after David loses a child, verse 24, Solomon is born. Now it's very interesting, a lot of people don't pick up on this, but it's an incredible statement.
Yeah.
Bathsheba
Yeah.
is the one who the Lord chooses to bring, instead of being in the dirt. From now on, yeah, she married her, and Solomon's, but you would think that from now on they'd want her to be in the background. He's got lots of other wives, she doesn't have to be brought to the front because she represents his greatest sin, the worst thing he's ever done. Instead, what does the Lord do? Brings them to the front.
Yes. Yeah.
Calls Solomon, she becomes pregnant again, and the Lord names this child, gives them a name for him, and then chooses him, who's way younger. He's got tons of older brothers who are in line for the kingdom, and the Lord chooses this child to be king, to replace David, breaking the lineage of the firstborn, and because there's tons, he's got like 6 brothers ahead of him.
Yeah.
But the Lord chooses this child, son of Bathsheba, the one who represents his greatest sin,
Right.
and turns it into being his greatest blessing. See, God would do that. And I'm always reminded of what Paul had in mind, and I guarantee you he had to have this story was in his mind too, when he said, the Lord will turn all things to good for those who love me and are called according to his purpose.
Wow.
In our weakness, he's made strong.
So the Lord demonstrates his love by taking David's worst thing and making it something that's a blessing, not a curse. Bathsheba is not a curse because Bathsheba is the mother of Solomon. So she becomes blessed. She becomes not looked down on, but respected and remembered in high regard. See that? So David can't be ashamed of it. Now they're in the forefront. God turned his worst mistake, his worst sin, into a blessing because those who love me. The Lord gives us a promise that when we love him and we give ourselves to his purpose, that he will take our sin and mistakes and he will turn it around and use them for good. And I've seen this happen in my life.
Amen.
Thank you, Jesus. Yes.
He does not say, if you sin, God will fix it and make it good. That's not what it says. All right? And he says, as the Lord will turn all things to good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose, meaning are called and have given themselves to his purpose. Right?
Amen.
That the Lord will turn your greatest failure into your greatest triumph. It's an incredible picture that the Lord did. David, of course, would always want Bathsheba and Solomon to be in the background, not in the forefront. But the Lord brings them front.
Was it known? Like, did everybody know?
Well, Sam, it was written in the everybody knew because it's even in Chronicles. Now, this story isn't in Chronicles because Ezra the priest, after the exile, chooses to leave it out. But he does write in, and David, at the end when David dies, he writes in, and David served the Lord with his whole heart for his whole life, and was obedient to God, except in the case of Uriah the Hittite and Bathsheba, and ends there. All right? So he didn't completely skip it, but he didn't tell the whole story. No, it was known.
Yeah.
And David didn't try to hide it. The Lord brought it out. Bathsheba was the wife of Uriah, who had David's child, and they lost it. right? And yet the Lord chose her next child to be his chosen a person on the throne. It's an incredible thing. God did that as a statement of his forgiveness, his statement of his blessing and favor, because of David's heart. Not because God just wanted to just make that whole thing go away. Did the Lord make it go away? Certainly not.
It probably spread like wildfire because, just the way people talk. And
Yeah, exactly. And of course, you see what happens with Adonijah and his daughter Dinah. His whole family has been affected and screwed up. And of course, it's, David does not get away scot-free. He receives punishment for what happened, but the Lord disciplines him as a son. But David turns in such a manner, repents in such a manner that the Lord is compelled to turn it into a blessing for him. And he does. He wouldn't have had Solomon without Bathsheba. Right? So, all right. So that brings us to verse 26 of 12. Now, Joab fought against Rabbah and the sons of Ammon and captured the royal city. And Joab sent messengers to David and said, I have fought against Rabbah. I have even captured the city of waters. Now, therefore, gather the rest of the people together and camp against the city and capture it, lest I capture the city myself and it be named after me. So they're about to take on this incredible feat. And Joab's saying, get down here and be with us so you can be there, or they're going to name it after me because you're not around. All right? So, but Joab wasn't being disrespectful here. He wanted David to come in and be the leader of it and receive the credit for it. That's really what he was doing here. All right? So David gathered all the people and went to Rabbah and fought against it and captured it. Then they took the crown of their king from his head, and its weight was a talent of gold, and it was a precious stone. And placed it on David's head, and he brought out the spoil of the city in great amounts. And he also brought out the people who were in it, and set them under saws and sharp iron instruments and iron axes, and made them pass through the brick kiln. And you're going, what? Someone get out an NIV. Who's got an NIV?
She's got one.
Okay, read verse 31 in the NIV.
And brought out the people who were there, consigning them to labor with saws and with iron picks and axes. And he made them work at brickmaking.
Okay, so that's the same verse. And let's look at it in the NAS. Then he took the... Okay, where's that part? 31. He also brought out the people who were in it and set them under saws, sharp iron instruments, and iron axes, and made them pass through the brick kiln. And thus he did to all the cities of the son of Ammon. Then David and all the people returned to Jerusalem. There seems to be a bit of a disagreement with the translators.
Different.
Okay? Now, you say pass through, but they're not exactly sure if see, the NIV translators came to the conclusion that that meant putting them to be forced laborers.
Right.
But the NAS translators here think that there's a chance that he put them to death this way because of who they were. The Ammonites were a plague to Israel for like 100 years. Okay? So, anyway, there's a little disagreement because when it says pass through the brick kiln, what does that mean? But other translations, see, it's just an argument over the original Hebrew. That's what it is. I pointed out to you that there's about 50-50 argument as to what that really says. It doesn't really matter either way because David is fighting these wicked Gentiles who are attacking him. So he's not attacking them. And he is protecting his people and his nation. So we don't know. We weren't there. I'm just telling you, I noticed that years ago that because I listened to NIV, but I read in the class NAS, so I caught that. I was like, oh, wow, they totally disagree. And I found other spots, too, where different English translations just see it differently. And, of course, that's, their job is to take that original and then decipher it the best they can into English, and they don't always agree. That's why you can't rely on one translation. You cannot. Because at the end of the day, it's still a translation. It's not the original. Right? Anyway. Okay. Chapter 13. Now I think it makes a little bit more sense. The NIV actually makes a little more sense. I think. Because even the text here seems weird. You know? But anyway, that's just my opinion. Who knows? Chapter 13. Now it was after that Absalom, the son of David, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Now let's just go through this story. It's another horrible story. Remember, I warned you that the Bible was rated R. See? Aren't you glad I warned you? All right? Not exactly the best Sunday school stories we're dealing with today, is it?
Oh, man.
You're not going to hear a lot of lessons on Amnon and Tamar and Tamar, as some people say, in Sunday school. But the Bible deals with real life, real people, the good, the bad, and the very, very, very ugly. Right?
Right.
So it never candy coats the truth. And what happened? It tells the story. This is what happened. David had many children. All right? Amnon actually is the one at this point who's in line for the kingdom. He's the oldest. But he sees one of his younger half-sisters. Okay? They have a different mother. All right? And he just thinks she's beautiful and he gets captivated by her. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have other wives, by the way. Or you have to remember that. Okay? So he sees her, and of course we know you went through the law. The Lord has already given what is good and what is evil. It's not a question of, is this evil? The Lord already said this is evil, and it's deserving of death. Punishment of death. Right? Didn't the Lord say that? You read it, right? Just for sleeping with his sister alone and rape. So 2 counts.
Right.
All right? So, now, but it's interesting because in Torah, you know, the girl has to cry out, and of course Tamar, we don't know if she cried out, but her brother is the next in line. He's the prince. She submits after she fights, but then she doesn't know what to do. But then she says, you know what? Fine, it's horrible, but for what you did now, she's trying to still save him by saying, "Ask the king," and he'll do it anyway, even though he shouldn't do it. He'll do it anyway, just so she was still trying to save him.
Right.
She was. It's amazing, but she was trying to actually help him. And then he went even more evil by then getting mad at her and sending her away after he slept with her. At least he's already bad what he did, but he could try to salvage it by claiming her. Now he's throwing her out as abused goods. See, the Lord, that's why we went through all those verses, and I had to point out to you, see, that sex is marriage in God's eyes. You say, well, that's a cruel rule that God did to us. Why did he do it? Because God is, hates women and it's all masculine? No, because God knows men. The protection for women is there in God's rules. If you sleep with a woman, she is yours. Take that rule away and what will happen? Men will abuse women. Have we found that?
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes.
Yes. You follow God's way and that's not going to happen, is it?
No.
So there you go. Well, so does something evil, and then of course does something more evil on top of it. Okay, but what's incredible to me in this story is that Tamar actually is still trying to help him. She's like, no, this is even worse. No, just ask the king and he can fix it. All right. So anyway, he falls for her, and he knows it's wrong, and he can't do it. But one of his attendants sees it and sees him and asks him what's wrong, and says, "Oh, I'm in love with my sister Tamar." And this guy's like, "Oh, I'm going to please the prince." He wants to give him what he wants. So he comes up with this sort of ruse and tells him how to do it. Asks the king to have her come. Remember, he's the prince. He's the next one in line, right? Come and have Tamar come and cook food. Have my sister come take care of me. And David doesn't know. He's like, "Oh, okay. Well, she'll probably gladly go." It's not the first time they know each other, right? She's obviously clearly considerably younger than him. He's probably easily in his 30s, while she's probably like 19, 18, something like that. Likely. Anyway. So he listens to his attendant, and they come up with this thing, and he pretends to be very, very sick, and she comes, and she helps him, and she's making food, taking care of him. And of course, when she comes close, he grabs her, and and of course, he rapes her because she says no way, and of course, he's strong, and it very clearly says because he's stronger than her, he overpowered her. All right, so, I know this is a horrible graphic story, and I hate even going through it, but this is what happened. But I think what's incredible about the story is that afterwards, Tamar then defends him and tries to help him rather than tries to kill him. She was a very loving girl, obviously. Why? Because this is the next in line of the throne. He's very important, and he becomes his laughing stock to all of Israel. That's horrible. It's an incredible embarrassment to the family. It's an incredible embarrassment to David. She was willing to eat all of that to save him. You see that?
Right.
And but anyway, he gets even more real, and he says now he hates her. So once he got what he wanted, he turned on her. Of course, that's very sadly normal, right? And he sends her away, and she says, "No, this would even be worse than what the first thing you did to me." And of course, he sends her away, and David hears about it, and of course, can't believe it. He doesn't even know. He can't believe this happened. But he's not exactly sure what to do, because Amnon is the next in line. He's a prince, and Tamar actually covers him. She could have come out publicly, but she actually tried to let it go. She was the one of the heroes in the story. It's Tamar. All right? Because she was the victim and yet acted in a godly manner. Okay? But Absalom sees what happens to his sister. They have the same mother, and of course he takes it personal. Now, one thing David should have done. Now, the Lord isn't counting this as David's sin. Doesn't mean that David didn't make a wise decision here. We all make mistakes. Hindsight is 20/20, right? If David would have acted against Amnon, even though that would have caused a bunch of problems and would have had a major embarrassment, a lot of things, right? If he had done that, Absalom might not have felt like he had to take justice into his own hands, but he felt like he did, right? Because since it seems that Amnon got away with it, Absalom in his heart said, well, the time's going to come, I will get justice for my sister. Right? He felt it was now personally his job to avenge her when, if he was punished or something happened, he might not have. Right? But Absalom decided he was going to kill him. And he is so crafty that he waited 2 years for the perfect time, the whole time waiting and knowing. So, because of course they would have been watching for a while now. But eventually he'll win them over, they'll drop their guard, and he can do it. So incredible premeditation here, right? Now, remember though that what Amnon did is very wicked, and biblically, according to God's law, is punishable by death. So, it was evil, and he should have been punished, right? So, time goes by, Absalom takes care of Tamar, takes her in, all right, takes care of her, and he says, well, I'm going to deal with him. So he waits 2 years, he wins everybody, like thinking that, they've moved past it and everything's fine, and he waits for the opportunity so they're not watching, and he sets up this whole thing, knowing that David can't come, but he does it just so they won't suspect. And he's asking David to come, but I can't come. Oh, but here, but they say, but let Amnon, because Amnon is the second in line. So Amnon's the greatest prince because he's the heir, the throne. Let Amnon come. And the king, at this point, 2 years, it's probably fine. They seem to get over it. So he says, okay, I'm not going to go with you. And they all are unsuspecting. Of course, Absalom tells his men and has it all planned out. The minute they get a chance and they get the word, they're going to kill Amnon. And of course they do. And someone comes running, and David hears, and the first thing he hears is Absalom killed all of the princes, and of course he loses it. But yet then a couple minutes later they come in and say, no, it's just Amnon that is dead. It's no, your sons. Absalom killed Amnon because he raped Tamar. Some people say Tamar, some people say Tamar, I don't know. So there you go. Anyway, and then David, of course, didn't know what to do. Of course, he's brokenhearted, but he understands. See, this one's a little different because he understands. And he feels responsible because he should have stepped in. Right? But it would have caused major waves in the whole kingdom if he did. It would have been a huge deal. That's why Tamar was still trying to protect Amnon even afterwards. Right? So, he doesn't, even though Absalom has now murdered the heir to the throne, David doesn't punish him or kill him. He actually just sends him away. He sends him away to protect him, actually, because at least it looks like the king did something and punished him and banished him from being in Jerusalem. But he's still, being taken care of and everything, right? Because David understands and is confused and feels responsible, right? Well, time goes by, and Absalom is still away and is banned from Jerusalem, and Joab feels that the king should bring him back, because the next one in line now is Absalom. Absalom is the second oldest. Okay? David ends up losing his top two, and then even Adonijah then later on. Anyway, we'll get to that. So Absalom, is away, and Joab knows that he's the next one in line, but he can't come back, and Joab feels a little sense of, yes, of course it's wrong what he did, but Amnon raped his own sister and then sent her away and got away with it. A lot of them don't really feel bad for Amnon. They think he brought it on himself, which of course he did. Right? But still, it doesn't mean in God's eyes it was right for that Absalom was justified. Vengeance is mine, I will repay. Right? So, anyway, but without justice, that's why the Lord cared so much about judges and justice and then enforcing the law and having justice in society. Because reprisal will always happen and vengeance will always increase without justice. Isn't that true? Always. So, what happens then is Joab then comes up with this idea. He knows how to mess with the king. He knows the king is very emotional. He knows that he's a big bleeding heart. Right? So how does he get to the king? He sets up this whole bleeding heart story to trick him and use his emotion, play on him, so that he brings Absalom back. Well, it works like a charm. Because that's a horrible saying. I don't know why I say that. I just heard that as a kid. All right, anyway, he says he has this woman come in, of course, because David would be very unsuspecting of this older woman telling the story, right? He would just break down and want to help her. About, the sons, she had 2 sons and they fought in the field, but the story actually plays into what happened. He's saying that, Absalom was a victim of circumstance, that he felt the need to have to give justice to his sister for what, and anyway. Because he tells the story that 2 sons were fighting in the field, but one of them died, and now they want to take her other son, the last light she has, all right, for all of her inheritance would be gone then, take him away and execute him. And she's asking the king for mercy, right? And she tells this whole story and explains it to him. And of course, David, big bleeding heart, like Joab knew, he broke down and said, "Oh, I won't let this happen. I will help you. I will, you won't lose all your inheritance." And of course, then he realizes, okay, hold on a second. And he notices something and he asks her a question. Did Joab put you up to this? Because he must have already heard that Joab had said a couple things here and there, right? So then she admits and says, yes, Joab put me up to this. You obviously realized it or saw it or discerned it. And but then she says, bring home your son. And so David is moved and compelled after that story about his decision that he made, that fake story, that he feels like he should bring Absalom back. So he brings Absalom back to Jerusalem. But he says, he can't see me. I can't see him. Bring him back to Jerusalem. He can still be with king's son, but I can't see him. And so Absalom comes back. He's there for a while, but yet he can't see the king's face, and he keeps getting upset about it. So eventually he attacks Joab, burns down his field. So Joab will come like, you burned down my field. What are you doing? And then he says, well, I can't see the king's face, so I figured, I'll cause trouble for you so that you go defend me. That's really what he was doing. So, but Joab listened, even though he should have beat Absalom down, not done that, but he listened and went and talked to the king on his behalf, and eventually the king gave in and let Absalom come in and be restored. Be restored as the heir to the throne. Okay? And, but what happens is, Absalom, crafty fellow that he is, decides in his heart, he's got wickedness in his heart. What he did, originally might have started out as him seeking justice, but he chose evil. Instead, he could have pressed the issue by bringing it up and going to David about what Amnon did. And he didn't have to kill him to bring justice. There was other ways he could have forced the issue, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously his heart, because he didn't repent of what he did, his heart was taken over. So now he has real wickedness in his heart. And what's called an Absalom spirit, he gets his own spirit named after him. Wow. Just like you have the Jezebel spirit, Ahab spirit, you have Absalom. What does that mean? That's usurping. What does he do now? He decides to erode David's authority over the kingdom by very subtly stealing the hearts of the people away. So what he would do is he would sit in front of the court. And everybody that would come in, this is what he would do every day. They would come in and he would meet them and they would go to bed because his king said, but instead, he would love them and schmooze them and then they would say, but he would knock the king down every time and lie. But win their heart by saying, but the king's busy, he can't help you. The king can help you. You see that? He made that up. He is trying to steal their heart away. So he's saying, the king can't help you. He's still busy. He's got all this other stuff going on. Saying, if only I could be appointed a judge, so I could help all people like you that are in need. And he so schmoozes each one of them that after a couple of years, they all think that Absalom would be the best king, that he's such a wonderful heart. He's so loving. He's so giving. And Absalom has painted the picture that the king is too distant and too busy for his people. Right? And it worked. Doesn't mean it worked with everybody, because you see there was still a whole section that was loyal to David, but it worked with the overall crowd. Right? And technically, Absalom is the next in line anyway. They're just doing it early. Right? So Absalom then goes to the king and has this whole plan that says, when I was away in exile, I made this promise to the Lord that if I was brought back, that I would go worship in Hebron. So David says, okay, go. And which means that he can bring all of his attendants and all his people when he asks for the king's permission. He brings a whole entourage with him, right? And he goes to Hebron, and of course then he declares himself king in Hebron with all of his close people that he knew would be on his side, because he already had a plan.
Was that the first split? That was when the north and the south?
No, we haven't gotten there yet, because this is dealt with. That happens after Solomon. Okay, we'll get to that. So, what happens now is that he declares himself king in Hebron, or Hebron, is really the right way to say it. And he and a bunch of attendants and people with him are saying it, and of course they start spreading it everywhere. And a lot of them, he already stole the hearts of a lot of them. And now, if there's enough attendants and enough soldiers and enough people with him, they're thinking, okay, well, we don't want to fight against that, and so they accept it. All right? He got just enough to tip the scale. Okay? But it was a long, just like he waited 2 years to fulfill his plan with Amnon. This was years in the making, this plan to steal the kingdom, right, and to hurt his father. So he does this, and he steals their hearts by usurping, and we say, well, what did he do? Well, it's called, in a very sly way, you put somebody down, right, and steal a person's heart. You've all seen it. You've all been touched by it. You just might not have recognized it. Okay, but it's a malicious design to steal affection.
Yeah, the word that this translation used was odious. I had to look it up. What a awesome, ugly word that is.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're describing. Odious.
Yes. But the point is that he by subtly putting down the king, he couldn't say the king's a total jerk. People would never listen to that. But he's distant. He's a little busy. And this happens in churches all the time. I've watched it. That's why they talk about the Absalom spirit in churches. And I've witnessed this with my own eyes. Well, the pastor's, he's busy. He's got a lot going on. I can help you. I know I'm not really a leader, but, I'll try to do my best for you. And suddenly, he's away right now, but I can help you. Right? And eventually, you become the savior of everybody, and you usurp, and then you make a play. Mm-hmm. That happens in churches all the time. That happens in churches with associate leaders, associate elders. That's a common thing in church leadership. All right? Where you just very quietly put down, but in a subtle manner, while you lift yourself up until you're strong enough to make a play, right? So the point here, that's also how it works with people stealing affection of spouses. You keep putting down a person's spouse subtly, and then eventually you're the savior, and after a couple of years, you win their heart. That's what people do. So anyway, I'm just describing to you what's called as the Absalom spirit. If you never heard that before, you will probably hear it now that I said it. All right. So and he also had to make a pillar for himself in Jerusalem before that, because he had no son. He had kids, but he was having no sons. All right. So he had to make this pillar to try to keep his name going. Is why he did that. Anyway. So he makes this play. It becomes a tipping point where many come to him, and David hears about it, that Absalom has declared himself king in Hebron and is coming for you. And of course, David now, it all clicks. Wow, he's been planning this for years. He set us all up. This has been coming for a while. He knows what he's been, but he thought he was just trying to be a loving, good son, trying to help. Right? And probably schmoozed David so much, David thought it was the best thing ever. But now he sees, oh my goodness, it was all a plan. Right? And he knows that how crafty he is, they just got to run. But see, David's mindset is, you say, well, why should he just stand and fight? Well, no, he doesn't. Why? Because his mindset is this. It's in God's hands. So he takes his family, his advisors, his guard. He still has a couple of hundred, like 500 or 600 men around him that are completely loyal to him, that only fight for him.
Best
right?
warriors in the land.
Yes. And they're with him, and they're a lot of them are still the guys that were with him in the cave, going all the way back.
Right.
All right? And he goes and he leaves, but a lot of them don't understand it, and they're saying to him, Why not stand and fight? Let's not let this happen. And he says, well, the Lord will judge. If the Lord if I'm pleasing to the Lord, and if He's pleased with me, He will bring me back. So just like we did with Saul, it's in the Lord's hands. The Lord will bring me back if He. Well, maybe the Lord wants Absalom to be king. Maybe because remember, he knows he still feels ashamed and responsible. He feels responsible for what happened with Amnon and Absalom. So he doesn't know it, and he says, well, the Lord will choose. Maybe this is supposed to happen. I'll leave it in the Lord's hands. So he goes humbly. He doesn't try to fight. Right? He goes and he prays, and then this guy Shemaiah comes out. and he starts cursing. He's from Saul. He's a relative of Saul, from Gibeah, who's a Benjamite, and he starts screaming at David and calling curses at him and throwing rocks and spitting at him. And of course, his men and one of his soldiers next to him says, "Just let me go cut his head off right now. Just say the word, king. Just all you got to do is say the word. I'll do the rest." And of course, most kings, of course, would do that, but David, of course, won't. David sits there and lets this guy do this to him. All right? And his men just can't
Understand.
at all get how he could let this happen. All right? So he lets this guy curse and scream and throw rocks at him, and he just takes it. And he says, the Lord will judge between me and Absalom, and the Lord will judge between me and you. And he keeps going. And but see, his men love him even though they don't understand him. But kind of why they love him, though. So they follow him, and he sends a couple guys back. Now, he leaves 10 of his, okay, there's that word. I told you I had to explain all this to you because it's all over the place. He left 10 of his concubines. What is that? Does that mean sex slave? No, we've already explained that. That means secondary wife. It's about the children not having inheritance rights over the kingdom. They have secondary rights. It's very complicated. You remember when I explained all that to you?
Yes.
Okay. See, there's the queen, right? And then there's all the kids would then be fighting and claiming the throne. You understand? Anyway, it's complicated.
I remember.
Yeah, there you go. So he leaves 10 of them there to take care of the palace and to keep things going. He doesn't. His last thought is that Absalom would harm them. He doesn't think he would do. He's got no reason to do that. Why would he do that? Right? So he keeps going, and he sends 2 guys back that he trusts to go kind of infiltrate and see what's going on. All right, and they go back, and one of his trusted friends, one of them's a priest actually, and he goes back, and there was this famous advisor named Ahithophel, and he, was there, and David cries and says, "Praise to the Lord, Lord, confuse and make the advice of Ahithophel be foolishness," because he's the famed advisor. All the kings, David has listened to him his whole life, and he probably was even served Saul. Who knows, right? Anyway, so of course Absalom comes into the city, and Ahithophel goes right to him and says, "Oh, long live the king." He says, "Oh, well, I served your father. Why not serve you too?" Right? No problem. Anyway, one of the other guys, the advisors that David sneaks in, but is actually loyal to him, goes back, but the men respect him, and he pretends that he's defected and he's totally on the side of Absalom, right? But he throws in this little different, disagrees with Ahithophel, and throws in this different little thing to do. Except Ahithophel is the one that Absalom listened to him at first, and he said, "Go and sleep with your father's concubines in public." That was Ahithophel who said that. And of course, if as good Christians, we can't fathom this. Now, again, we do live in this horrible world. All you have to do is watch anything on any network nowadays, and you see this is filth everywhere. So actually, we're kind of in Sodom, and we're kind of used to this kind of stuff again. 30 years ago, your mind would have been blown away. Nowadays, it's kind of normal behavior.
Was God using
right?
Was God using him to fulfill the curse?
God used Ahithophel to fulfill the curse, and Ahithophel, of course, went crazy and killed himself.
Right. But
still, it was fulfilled by his companion, by his own son.
Right.
Right? And now, of course, if you think that, I hope by now you remember this important lesson and why I taught you this. Because it doesn't say exactly, does it mean that God was okay with this?
No, of course
No.
not.
What do we have to do? It's all right. It's in there. We went through this a lot. What are we supposed to do is responsible hermeneutics, our process of interpretation. God has already said what's good and bad. The stories read as a newspaper. We apply the morality, we apply his law to the story, thus getting the answer. We apply the law of God to this story, and what is the answer? That this is evil. Right? That this is totally and completely evil. That sleeping with your father's wife was punishable of death.
Yeah.
Not to mention rape. It's now these women aren't going to put up a fight at this point. There's soldiers everywhere. They're not going to say a word. They want to live. You know, and the Lord knows their heart completely.
But Absalom might not have done that if that guy didn't.
If he hadn't said it, he put the thought in his mind.
Right.
But it was the way to absolutely show everyone that he was king and he doesn't care about his father at all and he's not afraid of him one bit.
Right.
Like the ultimate way to punch his father in the face, almost more than killing him. You know what I mean? That's what that was. And that's why it had to be public so that the people could see that Absalom is totally doesn't care about his father at all, is not afraid of him one bit.
Odious.
Odious. Right? Where I mean there's no going back. Now, of course, David is not normal.
Right.
But an average, actually didn't have to be, very righteous. An average, even very righteous man, that would be the end. There's no going back. There's no fixing this then. The line is gone.
Yeah.
Right? He went well beyond it.
Right.
So that was the point. Of course, that is what happened. But of course, then at that point, you realize, wow, the words of Nathan were fulfilled.
Yeah.
And sad and horrible as it is. Okay? And, well, David continues to just seek the Lord, and the other guy that he sends back says this other advice, and then they realize, wow, his advice is better than Ahithophel's. Let's do it because Ahithophel said, all right, go and get David now. Run him down right now and kill him right now, and then the men will turn. Of course, his advice was right in this circumstance. But David's companion, who was there undercover, says a different story that allows them time to turn the hearts of the people back. Right? Go out, wait us some time. So let David get plenty of time to get out and get safe. Right? And then muster all of Israel. Why did he want to muster all of Israel? So that they could see David and David could win them all back. Which of course he does. Right? And so anyway, they listen to him, and Ahithophel, they don't listen to him because he kills himself. That's because the Lord allowed him to go get taken over because of the evil choice that he made. Right? So they listen to this guy, which gives David time to go back, get safe, and regroup. But now they feel that, they're supposed to stand their ground now. They're coming to fight them. So remember, it's self-defense. You think, well, David stands and fights. Actually, David, his men, they just fight because they're being attacked. Amnon is coming to kill David. They're not going to let it happen. Right? And of course, they wouldn't just kill David. You'd have to kill all of his sons and every other male threat for the kingdom in order to really take it over. Right? So, they're coming, and of course David's men are going to stand and fight. Now they're fighting again like normal for David's men, 20-1 here.
Yeah.
And they're old. They're easily in their 50s and 60s. David is. And some of his original men, like Joab and Abishai, those guys are. Alright? But I loved what the one guy said, Ahithophel said. He was right. He said, the people know that your father fights like a lion, a bear robbed of her cubs, right? And his men are fierce, and they all know it. So if they start seeing them fight and start seeing them win, they'll all turn back to them. He was totally right, and that was their plan, right? But of course, the young guys still are thinking, there's no way these old guys are going to beat us. We have so much more. There's no way. Right? Well, of course, this whole army attacks, and David's 500-600 men just start destroying them. Right? And then they realize, but one little thing I can't skip in the story. David tries to go out. And they're like, no, give me a sword. I'm going to go fight.
Yeah.
And they're like, there's no way you're fighting. You go back. And David doesn't want to, but he submits to them. But David actually wanted to go on the front line and fight.
Yeah.
But his men were like, no way. You have to go and wait. You cannot fight. He listens. He wasn't going to take them all on, right? But it's incredible that even at his age then, he still wanted to fight. And so he goes back and he waits, and of course they attack, and his men just totally push them back. And it doesn't take very long for the rest of Israel to stop and realize that God is still with David. God is with David. These are his men. They never lose. God is still with David. And they turn on Absalom. Absalom has to flee. But David did this one thing. Again, so David. He goes to all of his lieutenants and he tells them, have mercy on Absalom for my sake. Not because he deserves it. That's what it means. Not because he deserves it, but for my sake. Right? So they hear it. Of course, Joab thinks in his mind, he knows the king. He knows the king's a big bleeding heart. Remember, he plays on it. No one knows him better. He knows that David would forgive Absalom, give another chance. That's how he knows. Except Joab knows as a commander, he absolutely cannot do that. Truthfully, Absalom should be killed. Joab is right here. But David is so emotional the way he is, and he feels responsible because the prophecy came to life of what he did, and he feels like all of it. So if you're wondering, why does he feel this way? I'm jumping ahead a little bit because what happens to Absalom. So I'll come back to that. So Absalom, is fleeing, and his head, he's going through forest on a horse, and his head gets stuck in a tree. Why? Because God doesn't want him to escape. Right? And he's hanging there. He's pinned in a tree. And, of course, the attendant sees him. One of the soldiers sees him, but it's like, no, I ain't touching him. And he goes back and tells Joab, I saw Absalom. He's pinned, but I can't touch him. The king said, you can't touch the king's son. And Joab says, why didn't you kill him? He said, well, I heard David tell you and all the lieutenants to have mercy on Absalom. And Joab says, okay. And Joab did not tell anyone else to do it. You know why? Because he knew only one could do it was him. Joab went and killed himself. And he was going to take the brunt for it. You notice that David never mentions it to Joab, even though he knows he did it? Because later on, David realizes he's totally right. Joab is totally right here. Okay, but David's heart. Now, okay, so David hears and he's waiting, and one guy comes, and this other guy wants to run with him, this young guy, because the point is they're excited and he wants to be a part. But he's a foreigner. So, the first guy comes and he says what happens, that the Lord has given you victory over your enemies, and the Lord has given you favor. And then this guy obviously didn't hear what David said to the commanders, because he says, and what is it with the young man Absalom? And of course he goes, may all the enemies of the king be like that young man. And of course David goes crazy. Now, of course, his heart is love, but it's misplaced here. He now always comes down to this. I remember the first time I read this story when I was young, that I never got, when I was a teenager, what is he doing? Like, he should be angry and celebrating that Absalom's dead. Absalom just did the worst betrayal that you could ever go through. Right? And, but David is crying and crying for him. Why? Why? Because he feels like it's his fault. He feels that all of this came about because of what he did by taking Bathsheba. He was told that it was going to be someone in his own house, right? It was going to rise up against him. It was part of the punishment. So he sees it as his fault, not Absalom's. That is why. He's totally blinded to that. And of course, there was a sins of the fathers and resulting curses that it was affected here, but it doesn't excuse what Absalom did. Because what Absalom did is inexcusable. Now Joab here, the king is mourning. Instead of congratulating his men like he should be, he's in his room crying and mourning his son. And the men come back and should be being celebrated for their victory. They have to go home quietly because the king is sad. He's not happy. But they just gave their lives to try to save him. Right? See, it shows his heart is love, but it's misplaced here. So Joab has to go and snap him out of it. But see, Joab is right. He has to go. See, Joab is a good guy and a bad guy. Joab is not, because 2 times he's a bad guy, and another one comes up soon. Right? Because Joab is a warrior, all he knows is war. But his interest is always to be loyal to David. He just thinks sometimes he knows better. You know what I mean? This time he does. But he's always loyal. Right? So, but he thinks this time David needed him. Because he knows how emotional David is, and David is lost in his emotion right now and not thinking clearly. So Joab has to go into him and say, you're sitting here crying and whining over your son while all of these men gave everything to protect your lives of your children and your wives and your family and your kingdom. And you're not even congratulating them. You care more about him who betrayed you than all of us. And of course, David listens to him and realizes, oh, he's right. And David gets up, goes out, calls the men, congratulates them. You notice he didn't say anything to Joab about killing Absalom.
Right.
He knows Joab killed him, but he didn't say anything. Because he was right. Joab absolutely should have killed Absalom, and that's why he did. Right? But David never would. And if they brought him back, David would have never let anyone kill him. He probably would have restored him, because that's how David is. Right? So, now, why I'm throwing that something at you that's a little bit in the future. Actually, you might have read it already. You probably did. Is because later on, no, there's way in the future. I haven't read it yet. When his kingdom is passed to Solomon, David brings up Joab, and it has to be dealt with. But David never would, because of how loyal all the things he did for David. But he brings up 2 times where he committed murder twice. And that was Abner, and then later Amasa, which we're going to get to very soon. Right? 2 commanders.
Yeah.
He does not mention Absalom once. Why? Because Joab was right about Absalom. That wasn't murder. And that was actually fulfilling what, in God's eyes, what needed to be done.
Right.
All right? So anyway, I'm just saying that even David later on at that point doesn't bring it up with Joab because he knows this time he was right. Okay? But, so what happens then is David is restored and there's a little tiff between, you see this little rift happening between Judah and Israel. Like Judah has now become, remember Judah grew so much that Judah made David king for 7 years before the rest of Israel caught up and they fought against it, right? But Judah is, and once you see in the census that all of Israel is 800,000 soldiers, Judah alone has 500,000. They're one tribe from 12. But this is how much they've grown and powerful they've become. Right? So there's a little fight there because the people of Israel say, we want to bring David back, but then the men of Judah go and just bring him on their own, and they get mad. But you just see seeds of the future happening here. All right? But they all are restored, and the kingdom is restored to David. But there's this one guy, I think his name is Bichri. All right? And now that brings us all the way to we're in chapter 20. All right? In chapter 20. And Sheba, Sheba, son of Bichri. All right? After this whole thing, when they're trying to restore the kingdom back to David, he throws out, well, I have no more faith in David and his sons, and he like throws up a revolt, like he's gonna take over. And a couple of men gather around him, and so they know he declared that he's going to challenge the throne. So David now says to Joab, go take care of this, or this could be even worse than what happened with Absalom. So Joab goes after him. All the men follow Joab. The whole army goes after this guy. And they get to this town. All right? And what happens in the town is that, well, before that. Now, what happened right before that at the end of the thing, with Absalom and all that, he says to Amasa, who's one of his captains, I'm going to make you king over my army instead of Joab, because the sons of Zeruiah are too powerful for me, meaning that Joab and Abishai are a little violent, and he can't control them. Like, remember, Abishai was the one who said, let me go cut his head off, and let me, right there. They're just too violent for David. He loves them. They're loyal, but so he says to Amasa, because he liked his spirit more, you're going to be my commander, because Joab just keeps doing right. Well, anyway, then Joab hears about it and sees it doesn't obviously like Amasa, and he kills him. He murders him. All right, and of course he pays for it later. Trust me. We're going to end here. It's 9:32. All right, we got to chapter 20. I had you read to what? 1 Kings what?
10.
All right, well, there's only a couple chapters up to 2 Samuel. We're going to keep flying through, especially because once, so finish 1 Kings. Let me see how long it is. Let me make sure first. 1 Kings is, oh yeah, you can finish it. It's 20, oh yeah, you can finish it easy. I had you read to 10?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So then you only have 12 chapters to read, and you'll have plenty of space. All right? Have a wonderful week.